Going into Moana 2, I subconsciously knew the truth walking in. I knew that this was a movie originally envisioned as a Disney Plus TV show. For reference, when this changed was literally this year. In February of 2024, CEO Bob Iger announced that this series had been reworked into a movie. It was going to be a theatrical sequel to the 2016 film. And The Rock may claim that he's been involved since day one for this project. I don't think that's true. We'll get to why I think that. But I knew going in that this was literally a last second, we're going to make this a movie. And I knew Lin-Manuel Miranda wasn't returning. And I knew the press screening was happening literally 24 hours before the movie screened. And with that said, because I know it's already sounding like this might be a bash party on Moana 2 and Disney as a whole, I want to say something real quick for people to stay tuned to this video, because I am going to say some negative things about Moana 2 and the state of Disney as a corporation right now, and as a corporation making entertainment. But Moana 2 is better than it has any business being, given the circumstances. And that doesn't sound like high praise, but we need to approach Moana 2 as a movie that was never intended to be a movie. And here's how I would describe the experience of watching Moana 2. Take everything you like about the first film and just kind of mute it down about 50%. This movie is about half as good as the first Moana film. Now, I happen to hold the first Moana film to a very high pedigree. So that doesn't bother me necessarily. Like, it even being 50% of that, this movie is still pretty entertaining for what it is. It's just nowhere near as good as the original, but there's still elements to enjoy for sure. But nothing is better in this movie. None of the characters are better. None of the songs are better. The world isn't better. Nothing elevates this world in any meaningful way. And I want to talk about the cynicism of Disney, and I think it's fair to talk about this before we really get into the review of this film, and to kind of understand the context of which Moana 2 exists. And I think that's really key to understanding today's review. We have to kind of go backwards for a second. And we need to talk about the animation field at Disney right now and really talk about their post-COVID releases. So 2019, they get Frozen June. It's $1 billion movie. 2020, obviously the pandemic happens, and then we get the post-COVID. We get Raya and the Last Dragon. We get Encanto. We get Strange World. We get Wish. And now we get Moana 2. Obviously, Raya and Encanto, they suffer box office wise because of the fear of the pandemic, people not returning to theaters. Obviously, Encanto seems to have gotten a new life on Disney Plus. Like, the film certainly became popular. Strange World tanked. Wish tanked. And then all of a sudden, after Wish tanks in November of 2023, what happens? February of 2024. Oh, well, you know what? Moana 2, this is a movie now. And let's think about why that is. And it's very obvious why. They didn't have a movie ready to go for 2024. They did not have a Thanksgiving movie. Maybe it's the effects of the strike. I don't know. But their next animated movie on the books is November of 2025 for Zootopia 2. So they would have just bypassed Thanksgiving this year. And if you look at what 2023 was for Disney, let's be quite frank about it. Their films were The Little Mermaid, which earned money, but wasn't the $1 billion hit I'm sure they were hoping for. Elemental, which ended up, doing fairly well, but it definitely had some bad stink around it, and it had a slow box office start. Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, which underperformed heavily. Haunted Mansion, which I don't recall performing particularly well. Wish, which underperformed. Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania, which underperformed. And The Marvels, which underperformed. So it's really easy to know why Moana 2 exists in the form it does. They're hoping that they can get a movie that makes over $500 million. It is a bottom line, and Moana 2 is a bottom line movie. And that's a really cynical read on it, but I think it's a very truthful read of the movie. When I talk about this idea that this is a lesser movie, that this is the first Moana, but about 50% as good, an element that highlights this very obviously is the songs in Moana 2. The highlight of the first movie is Lin-Manuel Miranda's soundtrack. There's legitimately a lot of great music in that movie. In Moana 2, not one song is memorable. Not a single earworm in the bunch of the soundtrack that has quite a lot of music in it. The Maui song performed by Dwayne Johnson in this movie is probably the best. It's still a pale imitation of You're Welcome. And again, it's entertaining. Like watching it, it's a fun enough song. I can't say I remember it any way or would ever really have the urge to listen to it. There isn't even a song that I defend from the first Moana film, which is Shiny. There's not even that level of catchiness in this movie. And the new composers / writers for this movie, the songwriters, are Abigail Barlow and Emily Bear. Incredibly talented artists. But the music just doesn't live up to the first. And that's a high bar to set. But when the movie is such an iconic soundtrack, it's hard to then come back with a second movie that just doesn't have that element to it. And I think you can take that same logic and look at all of the other aspects of Moana 2. With that said, let's talk about the biggest element of this movie. Really the person who's really helped sell this movie and I think helped make the 2016 film a phenomenon. It is the character of Maui, played by Dwayne The Rock Johnson, who has really inserted himself into this franchise. He's obviously going to be in the live action film coming out, I think in 2026, but he's here. And Dwayne The Rock Johnson has made Maui maybe his most beloved, maybe his most popular character in his career, and wonderfully so. The Rock is really good as Maui. And I totally understand the praise. Moana is a movie based around the star power of The Rock, and The Rock comes and delivers and does it in a way that is both respectful to a culture and also is able to add just a new fun character. What he is able to do as a star power to weaponize his persona, I think is pretty amazing. And in this movie, he's good. I like watching Maui on the screen, and Dwayne Johnson's just really naturally funny in this role. I don't believe the whole aspect of Dwayne The Rock Johnson talking about he was always involved in this project as a TV show, and then when it became a movie. And you can kind of tell that way in the structure of this movie. It's very obvious where they inserted the character of Maui, and you can very clearly see where that happens because there's new cast members in this movie and they're very clearly there to fill a Maui void, I would say. We get 3 new cast members, Loto, Kile, and Mooney. Kile is my favorite of them, played by David Fain, a frequent collaborator of Taika Waititi. But these characters are very clearly there to kind of help steer the way in a post-Maui franchise, one where they can't just pay The Rock to be on an animated TV show. And that's fine. I didn't think any of these characters besides the character of Kile, who is an elderly farmer who joins Moana in this quest, which I realized I haven't actually done the introduction of this movie. So maybe I should just describe what the movie is because I know not everyone knows what it is. Moana 2 follows the Moana character as she journeys to the far seas of Oceania to break the gods Nalo's curse on a hidden island which once connected the people of the ocean together. And it's an interesting premise, and we'll get to that in a second. But there are elements of the Moana movies that really work in this movie. For instance, I think the performances from the cast that was in the first movie largely carries over and is really good. The vocal actress who plays Moana is very talented. I like spending time with Maui, of course, played by The Rock. Her parents, her grandmother, the chicken, the pig. There's a lot to really like in this cast. And again, this review, I really need to make it clear because I know it's been quite a cynical take thus far. This review is not saying that Moana 2 is a bad film. I am not saying that at all. There are components of this movie that I found quite fun and endearing. There is a heart to this film that really works. And the film looks gorgeous. The ocean animation is pretty stunning. There's some fun visual set pieces in this movie. And the use of colors are just excellent in this movie. It's a really eye-catching movie to watch. And I liked this idea of the Moana story that I mentioned, this progression of her character. It's a really natural progression for this character, and it elevates what she does in the first movie, and it allows her to fully explore who she is in a delightful way. Like it builds off the first film really well. Like that element does work in this movie. And I would say this movie gets better the longer it goes on. I liked the third act of this movie. I actually thought the third act was pretty wonderful in this movie. I liked how it's framed. I liked the seriousness of it, of the emotions. There is clearly a careful respect and honor that this film has to a culture. And I think that's well conceived. And I think in the third act, it really comes together in this climactic battle, if you will. And I really appreciate it. Like, that's a really fun, endearing, and I found it to be quite serious take on this material that actually does work to advance the characters in a cohesive and thoughtful way. Where other aspects of this movie fail to entertain me is this film's humor. This movie relies heavily on gross out humor. It's not even like I was annoyed watching the gross out humor. I did just notice that they kind of kept doing the same joke over and over again. Character gets covered in gross goos and oozes. There's a lot of like bodily noises jokes. And again, that's fine. It's completely fine. Like, but it's the thing is like, that's a lot of the punchlines in the movie. And it's like, there's no better joke to do in this movie or in this moment. It just made it feel a lot more juvenile than I remember the first film to be. And maybe that makes it a little bit more endearing for younger audiences who are going to be engaging with this movie on Disney Plus when it was originally conceived as a TV show. I will say, I actually thought this movie would be too intense for a lot of younger audiences to be able to grapple with. Like, there's some quote unquote scary imagery in this movie. Like, nothing that's actually scary, but I'd imagine for a kid, it's probably pretty frightening. There's like this bat lady in the movie that I think would probably scare kids. Like, there's a bat in this movie. I'm not someone who loves bats. Like, it's a little like, it's, you know, I if I was a kid, the bat would probably have freaked me out. And I think there's just a little bit too much of that in this film for the younger demographics. And I think people will appreciate and like that. It's more of a warning. Like, I don't know if this is like, bring the kiddos. Like, where I don't remember the first Moana ever having a moment that's like, you can't bring the kiddos. Like this one, it might be a little intense for some of the younger audiences. What works best about Moana 2 is when it focuses on its heart. And it's also what makes the first film so endearing. And the protagonist of Moana, just a really lovable character. You buy into her and her story. Like, you buy into the family elements of this story. The emotion, the dynamic between her and her sister in this movie is really well done. This film wears its heart on its sleeve in a really impactful and really kind and really loving way. And you get the Moana and Maui relationship, which is a very clear highlight. That chemistry of those two in the first movie is back in this film, and you really buy into this friendship. And it becomes a story of Moana finding her path. Like, everything that deals with Moana growing as a character, I enjoyed it in this movie. Again, it's not necessarily done in the most cohesive of ways at all times. I don't think the story is anywhere near as strong. I don't think the elements and the music and everything that made the first film so special is there, but I did like what they did with the Moana character. So ultimately, this movie is okay. It's enjoyable. I enjoyed seeing this movie. It just fails to compare to how great the first movie is. And it's really an experience that I would say, yeah, it makes sense this was a Disney Plus design show, because that's where I feel like it should be consumed. Like, my enjoyment of this movie wouldn't have changed if I watched it on Disney Plus. And that's not an indictment. It's just kind of the truth of the situation. This does feel like B material from Disney, where you want to get your A list. You want to get your A material in theaters. So ultimately, it's a fine enough movie. I can softly recommend it. I don't think this is going to do anywhere near as beloved as the first film does, but it's not bad. Like, it's okay. It's just the whole aspects that come together that made this film the way it is, and the fact that it's not really a film. It's quite literally stitched together in, literally we found out this in like February. Like, that's crazy to me. We found out in February 2024. Oh, we're reimagining this as a movie that's now coming out in November. Like, that's a really cynical thing to me. But as the product, this is better than it has any right to be. I'm going to give it 2.5 out of 5 stars. So thank you all for watching this video. And if you like this video, make sure to like and subscribe for more.